public health benefits of making roadways safer for all modes of traffic. So, in other words, beyond just crash safety, are there any other benefits to creating a safer transportation system for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists?
Well, I think all of us would like to enjoy our surroundings and our communities a bit more, and feeling comfortable to take a walk down the street and not be afraid that you might inadvertently get hit, or ride on our bicycle, or be able to drive safely from one location to another. We don't anticipate in being in crashes, and so these are always sudden, unexpected events. So just having that better life, quality of life, that community of life. And of course, you can always think about the economic hardships that people suffer, both from medical bills that they may incur, from loss of job being productive. Even a minor crash can set you back with aches and pains for a day or two, and you might not go to work. Well, you're losing money, your employer's losing money. So there's a dollar amount tied to that as well that we can all benefit from, in making our areas safer for us to live, to work, to play, and to enjoy as a community.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the questions for right now.
Thank you so much, Wayne, and thank you, Courtney. That kind of gave me chills a little bit. All right, so now moving on to a discussion about our focus areas for the action plan. So these are topic focus areas and geographic focus areas that account for the highest percentage of fatal and severe crashes in Dallas, and that we should be targeting in order to make the most progress to get towards our Vision Zero goal. They were identified through a crash data analysis and through our first Vision Zero public survey with additional input from our task force. And these focus areas are intended to provide the framework and sort of grounding for the Vision Zero action plan. And to note, some of the geographic focus areas are already in the process of being addressed through various programs, such as the Texas Department of Transportation Highway Safety Improvement Program. So our topic focus areas, these are the factors that count for the highest percentage of severe crashes. So number one is pedestrian involved crashes. Pedestrians are involved in 36% of fatal and severe crashes in Dallas, and that has a lot to do with the vulnerability of pedestrians, you know, not having a steel box in which you're in. And so when crashes involve pedestrians, they tend to be a lot more severe. Number two is speeding and unsafe travel speeds. So according to police crash reports, this is involved in 19% of crashes. And the reason why speeding and unsafe travel speeds are so important is because really the severity of injuries is all about physics. It's about the momentum at which somebody is struck or in their car, so that's where the seatbelt part comes in, but it's really all about particles in movement and the severity of that. Left turn crashes occurred in 10% of crashes. Red light running was also 10%. Under the influence, 14%. Not using proper restraints, so that includes seatbelts and car seats, and then distracted driving. Distracted driving was not present in very many of the police crash reports, but through our first public survey was identified as a top priority for the community. So now onto our geographic focus areas. We developed a high injury network, and this maps streets where a disproportionate number of severe crashes have occurred. And these are shown in the gray lines on the map. And it does not include freeways. So in Dallas, the high injury network represents the 8% of streets that account for 60% of severe crashes. However, because the high injury network, even though it's only 8% of streets, accounts for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of roadway, we also identified high priority corridors and intersections as a starting point in the first 2 years of the program. So these are intended to be the top 50 street miles and the top 50 intersections. Also talking about geographic focus areas, what we saw on the previous slide with the high injury network, that was really crashes that were identified through a hotspot analysis. And it's really about where crashes have occurred in the past. But with Vision Zero, we also want to make sure we're trying to prevent crashes from happening in the future, not just there, but everywhere. So we conducted a systemic safety analysis that identified locations that we should address system-wide using low-cost improvements. So all of this is to say that not only those places on that map will be addressed, we intend, and the goal is to make improvements citywide. And here's a little bit about the methodology of going through that, but essentially it involves, we've already identified our focus crash types. So one example is left turn crashes. Next, we look at what should be our focus facilities. And so looking at the data, a lot of left turn crashes, the significant proportion of them happen at signalized intersections on 6-lane divided roads. So not mid-block, not on lower number of lane roads, but on 6-lane divided roads. From there, we identify what sorts of risk factors we should be targeting. We select countermeasures and we prioritize those projects. Okay, so after a lot of technical discussion, going back for a little bit of a break, so I think I'm turning it back over to Wayne.
Okay, so next question we have is going to be for Albert. Just wanted to ask, so we've heard a little about what these crashes look like kind of from a medical standpoint and from the data standpoint. So what about from the standpoint of DPD officers? So how do you see the types of crashes listed in all of the focus areas as being, contributors to fatal crashes?
Sure, thanks for the question, Wayne. Let me start with what was just presented by Catherine. We all know distracted driving is a big factor nowadays. When you see one car rear-end another, you can be pretty much assured there was distracted driving. That's whether you're enjoying your Starbucks, your McDonald's, your homemade brew, whatever the case may be. Most are usually on their phone or some type of device and they're distracted. The reason why you don't see a lot of that right now in crash reports is because the officer cannot necessarily prove that the person was doing some kind of action that would cause the distraction. That's, in my opinion, the only reason why you don't see it as significant right now. Now, going back to the earlier part that Catherine was talking about, when you look at our pedestrians, again, as mentioned, that's a big factor because when pedestrians are on the side of the road, that they're extremely vulnerable. I really hate seeing people on the side of the freeways, especially when they're broken down or they're there trying to repair their vehicle. And in some cases, they don't have a choice. And in other cases, they actually do. They just don't want to damage their rim, right? And so they kind of stay in place. Speed is the biggest factor by far. Like Catherine said, the physics involved, the velocity causes that, the level of injury, just like with not wearing a seatbelt. You increase your chances of not surviving or having some serious bodily injury as a result of not having seatbelts. So that being said, we also realize from a department standpoint that enforcement is very critical to this to help prevent, because the whole idea, the whole principle of having traffic enforcement is actually to change behavior, to modify behavior so we can increase the safety. And as we've all experienced, stat after stat after stat, from Parkland to any hospital to the department to each one of us personally, we all experience some kind of severe loss or a severe cost, whether as a society, through our insurance, all of us being jammed up on the roadway somewhere where you're down to 1 lane or 2 lanes because of a major crash. So it impacts us in all sorts of ways. Having said that, as you all mentioned, education, enforcement is key, and that's what we're working on from our standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot can be said about kind of the crossover between education and enforcement with regards to Vision Zero. So just kind of piggybacking off that, our next question is going to be kind of education centric for Emma. So for your perspective with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, could you speak a little bit about why driving under the influence, particularly by young people, is so dangerous and so important for us to try to address?
So yes, it is very dangerous. I mean, teen alcohol use kills over 4,300 teens each year. And so MADD is working hard not only to partner with law enforcement, but partner with other community partners to educate teens why it's important to wait until 21, not only because it's illegal, but we've learned through research that it has long-term negative effects on those memory and learning functions. And when that happens, it can be difficult to drive safe. And when you are impaired, you react, you have slower reactions, you do a lot of weaving, and it's difficult to react quickly to signals and sounds. So it's very, very important that we educate our teens to wait until 21, not only from a legal standpoint, but from a mental and healthy and traffic safety as well.
Thank you so much. That's all of the questions that I have for now.
All right, thank you, Wayne. So now I think we're getting into recommendations, and I believe I'm about to do a lot of talking, so y'all might have to bear with me and buckle up, not to get too punny here, but going to be a lot of content. So yeah, I would urge you to stay tuned. So talking about first overall themes for the plan. Here we just kind of overall arching themes. Number one is working across departments and agencies is going to be so important, and taking a comprehensive approach. And that's not just engineering enforcement, education, etc. That's everybody. That's everybody in the community that's going to need to participate in this for us to make a difference. Number two is to use data to determine priorities. 3, directing our resources to high injury locations. 4 is managing speeds to safe levels. And by that, we mean it does depend on the context. It's not necessarily everywhere, but areas where you have vulnerable road users around, like a lot of pedestrians around, a lot of young children around, where there's a lot of conflicts, managing speeds, particularly in those areas. And also just creating a culture of safety within the city and the public at large. So now we're going to be going through each of the 5 E's, starting with engineering and talking about things we're already doing and then our recommendations for the plan. So some of the things that we're already doing include adding reflective back plates around our traffic signal heads. So you might see some of our traffic signal heads have a yellow border around them. That's to help with visibility and things like red light running. Increased funding for pavement markings to start refreshing them more often, converting lights to LED, implementing complete streets projects, also implementing priorities in the sidewalk master plan and working to update our bike plan. We're seeking grant funding to upgrade traffic signals as well. So here's the first slide of our engineering draft recommendations. Number 1 is just conducting engineering safety evaluations, and the goal is for an average of 10 miles of high priority streets on the Hydra network annually in order for us to target the top 50 miles on the Hydra network in 5 years. And this might not sound like a lot, but it would make a huge difference. So for each of those streets across the city, start implementing low-cost, high-impact improvements at 50 intersections and corridors over 5 years. Also establish a pipeline of more expensive capital projects and seek funding for those projects. And starting in 2023, strive to implement an average of 5 major projects annually. So to explain what I mean by low-cost improvements versus capital improvements, on the left, we have some low-cost things that we could start implementing right away without as much funding. So that includes the back plates with the reflective borders, lighting, things like leading pedestrian intervals where it allows the pedestrian to start crossing first so that they're easier for drivers to spot who might be making turns. More expensive capital improvements include things like more specialized pedestrian signals, things like roundabouts, sidewalks are sometimes pretty expensive, and also things like implementing left turn lanes where none exist today. So next, adopt new policies, procedures, and standards. And what this is really getting at is integrating Vision Zero into every aspect of our street and transportation design, from the street design manual to our standards and markings to our just everyday policies. And some of these things include things like adding a safety toolbox to our street design manual or enhancing it, supplementing guidance for setting speed limits to make sure that we're considering things like crash history when we set speed limits. Also adopting mid-block pedestrian crossing criteria to make it easier and more efficient for staff to implement more pedestrian crossing improvements. Next, increase speed data collection so we can look at those speed limits. Conduct a citywide review of existing speed limits by the end of 2024. Implement speed humps and cushions. Fund and implement priority sidewalks and bike facilities. Install new or improved pedestrian crossings. Continue to enhance the maintenance of street markings. Coordinate with the Texas Department of Transportation on making safety improvements along state roads like Buckner, Ledbetter, and Northwest Highway. And also seek funding from external sources to make those improvements, and also implement safe routes to school improvements to help make it easier, more comfortable, and safer for students to walk and bike to school. So now on to enforcement. So some of the things that we are already doing that help advance Vision Zero include DPD having a dedicated traffic enforcement squad to supplement its patrol officers made up of around 25 to 30 motorcycle officers. DPD actively seeks to ensure enforcement does not overburden minority populations, which is crucial for the equity piece of Vision Zero. And also, Courts and Detention Services has a diversion program to provide alternatives to traffic fines, also a crucial piece for equity. So some of the draft recommendations are, number one, to conduct high visibility enforcement along Hindry corridors each quarter, targeting the most dangerous driving behaviors. So things like speeding, running red lights, and distracted driving. And to make sure that we're determining enforcement priorities based on a data-driven approach. Number two is establishing a speed enforcement program with monthly ongoing speed enforcement activities rotating through Hindry Network corridors. Making sure that we're adjusting DPD enforcement plans to prioritize the enforcement of the most dangerous driving behaviors. Providing a consistent level of enforcement across all DPD divisions, so across all areas of the city. Working with Courts and Detention Services to create a graduated penalties for repeat offenders who engage in dangerous driving behavior. Also, number six, addressing some of the current challenges to speed enforcement. And these all of these recommendations in the presentation are posted online, so I'm just going to go through some of these a bit more quickly. 7, address challenges to enforcing failure to yield to pedestrian violations. There's a new state law that was passed, and so the recommendation is to provide officers with training on it. Provide training for officers on immediate and advanced crash investigation to make sure that we're recording all of the crash factors as thoroughly as possible. Incorporate Vision Zero materials in cadet officer safety training, and expand and make permanent DPD's driving while intoxicated squad. Next, education. So number one is just to make sure that we are aligning all of our education under the Vision Zero umbrella. Currently, some people are doing a couple things here, some things here. We want to make sure to have the greatest impact that people understand the overall intent, which is Vision Zero. Convene interdisciplinary meetings with folks like Courtney and Emma to facilitate coordinated and strategic outreach. Develop and implement a safety education campaign, which would really target speeding, failure to yield, and other forms of reckless driving. Increase awareness about that new state law that I just mentioned, which requires drivers to stop for pedestrians when they're in crosswalks, so not just yield. Also, implement walking, biking, and safety education in schools in coordination with Dallas ISD. Increase brand recognition, develop branded signage to install near infrastructure projects. Also, to provide education prior to intensified enforcement in certain areas. And finally, making sure that we are doing a good job of getting the word out by conducting surveys to gauge public understanding. All right, next, coordination and legislation. So coordination, just making sure that we are convening regular meetings of the task force to make sure that we are on task and on target to implement the plan. Legislation, working with other cities in Texas to effectuate lowering speed limits for residential streets to 25 miles an hour. And I believe there's evaluation and then maybe equity left. So evaluation, number one, making sure we're being transparent. So creating an online interactive map of crashes behind your network, etc., and publishing an annual report on our progress. Continuing to do crash pattern evaluation, comparing hospital data to police crash reports, developing metrics to make sure our projects are successful, and also just adding traffic safety performance measures to Dallas 365, which is really what guides our annual budget for DPD and the Department of Transportation. And here are some of the metrics that can be tracked, which again, you can see on our presentation posted online. All right, last but not least, equity. So some of the things that we're already doing include implementation of the city adopted Connect Dallas Strategic Mobility Plan, which covers the guiding principles of safety and equity, and collecting crash data to make sure to evaluate trends. Draft recommendations include comparing hospital data to police crash reports, because sometimes other cities have found that police crash reports may underreport lower income, non-English speaking populations who might not want to call the police. And so to make sure that we are not undercounting folks. Also integrating equity into the prioritization of safety improvements, and making sure that enforcement is equitable and doesn't overburden minority populations. Okay, so now I think I'm handing it back over to Wayne, but or Hortensia. Is that correct?
We do have some public questions. We can go ahead and start addressing some of those, and then we can go back to the panel questions that Wayne has. So just to cover some of these, so the first question is, does the City of Dallas Neighborhood Traffic Management Program coordinate with Vision Zero?
So the city currently does not have a formal traffic management program. It is something that I believe development services in coordination with planning and urban design and transportation staff are working on, but it certainly would be incorporated and work with hand in hand Vision Zero.
Thank you. Okay, we have someone asked, please discuss the 85th percentile rule. Not sure.
I can take that. So 85th percentile, it has to do with the methodology for settings for how speed limits are set. So an industry practice and a recommendation is you want, so I guess taking a step back, it not only is safe, it's not only good for speed limits to be, you know, just for speeds to be lower, but also for people to be traveling consistent speed. So there not to be huge variations in the speeds that people are going. And so that's where the 85th percentile comes. It's a way of setting speed limits whereby 85% of people are going below that speed to try to make sure that we are setting a speed limit that will keep people grouped together and going around the same speed. However, there's been recognition by the Federal Highway Administration and others that just using that alone can sometimes result in posting of higher speed limits, and then people go faster, and then you post a higher speed limit. So other factors need to be looked at as well, like crash history and certain land use things like the number of driveways and other factors.
Hortensia, I think you're muted. Yeah.
I'll unmute, sorry. How do you deal with a street that is also a Texas highway?
So for streets like Loop 12, it depends a little bit for some of the streets, but in general, the city controls most aspects of those streets. We just have to get approval from TxDOT, and usually that is state approval. So we, I I think they usually maintain the surfaces, so the street, so the surface quality, the pavement, and the markings, but we maintain and operate the street lights, and we set the speed limits. So that's why state roads that are like Loop 12 and don't have highway on and off ramps, that's why those are included in this plan, because the city does have potential to impact them, but we do have to work hand in hand with TxDOT and use TxDOT standards for those roads.
If I may add to this one, is that it depends on the facility. Some of them had different agreements depending on the time when these agreements were executed between the city and TxDOT. So we have to coordinate with TxDOT, and being that the facility is overseen by the state, and therefore it depends on which facility we have. So some facilities we do have responsibilities for example, for the pavement quality. Other facilities where the city is not responsible for that pavement. But one thing that is common throughout the city is that the city of Dallas maintain and operates all the traffic signals and most of the street lights.
And Gus and Catherine, if I can add to that, Ms. West is talking about East Grand being Highway 78 as well. So, but the city regulates the speed, right? It's our engineers that post it. Let's say it's a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit zone. Are we the ones posting it as a 45, or does TxDOT post a speed limit on that? If you know, Gus, you may.
Okay, so I have to kind of verify how, I mean, the history behind it. That was before my time with the city, but generally speaking, is that the TxDOT or the city can perform the traffic, speed studies and determine what the speed limit should be. So whether it be in the city or the TxDOT, so either one of us. But so I have to verify who determined who did the last study on Grand to verify that.
Okay, and Ms. West, as far as speed enforcement, that's us, the Dallas Police Department, and we can do that. You can contact 311. You can also look up and contact our traffic unit. I think from a city standpoint, we prefer 311 because it captures, and then you'll see us take enforcement for a week or so, and then we just have to ask what we'll ask is that traffic put it on their board. The Northeast Patrol Division or Central Patrol Division put this on their board so we can take enforcement. We add it into our rotation, but then we also ask of you and your neighbors to call 311 if you don't see us for, let's say, a week or two, so we can make sure that we're back again. And that's just something that helps us as well.
All right, thank you all. We have a few more questions. What will be done to get Vision Zero message out to the general public and getting more people aware of these goals?
I'm sorry, Hortensia, can you repeat that one?
Okay, what will be done to get the Vision Zero message out to the general public and getting more people aware of these goals?
So that's what we're kind of working on right now. So we would encourage everybody who's listening to go out and tell people they know about this, and to tell them to take the survey and to stay engaged and, you know, passionate and interested in traffic safety. But also, you know, one of the recommendations here is to utilize our existing resources that are currently geared towards the same things in general, but not quite aligned, trying to align those so we can achieve this bigger purpose and reach more people with one consolidated message. So for example, making sure our DPD outreach are saying the same things or similar things, or trying to get the same message out as our folks here in transportation and other partners in the community.
Someone is asking, how can we reduce the duck fatalities on Turtle Creek Boulevard?
So with all of these streets, an engineering study would need to be conducted to identify what improvements are warranted based on the types of crashes that are happening. It's all about very specific circumstances on each street, and that's why we need our engineers to go out there and take a look at it and not just copy and paste, but make sure that we're addressing the specific needs of that roadway.
Is there somewhere to view the HIN streets identified and shown in the presentation?
So we have a PDF copy of it on the presentation that's online. And if Hortensia hasn't already linked that, I'm sure she can. But you know, we'd be happy to put out just a document with that as well. We plan to put out a lot more resources and all this information in that interactive map that's recommended, but we just need to go through some city approvals first. But I believe we should be able to put out just a larger PDF of that map.
I've linked the page that includes the Vision Zero page will have any links for any maps or interactive, the interactive maps and the surveys and everything that's related to the Vision Zero program. Let me keep going here. One-ways are dangerous and not pedestrian friendly. How can we go about changing many of our one-way roads, such as those in downtown and North Haskell, to two-way?
So again, those all require engineering studies, and that's why the very first recommendation of this plan is to conduct more of them to identify what improvements can be made to improve safety. And just like everything, you know, individual streets are very unique, and what works for some might not work for others. And so it's just about going out and identifying the specific needs of that. But first, we need to start conducting more engineering studies and making that a priority and collecting data.
Okay, and if Albert, if you could provide the contact for the Central Division, someone is asking for that in the chat, please. And yes, I think that's.
I'm doing it right now to Mr. West.
Perfect, thank you. I think those are all questions. If anyone else wants to include a question, please drop it in the chat now. But if Wayne wants to go ahead and continue with the panel discussion questions, we can go back to that now.
Sure, I got a few more questions to throw at our panelists. The first one's actually going to be for Catherine about infrastructure improvements. So how will the project prioritization process be different after the implementation of the Vision Zero action plan? Or more broadly, how will the Vision Zero approach be different than what happens in the city today?
So the biggest difference will be a really laser focus on our crash data and what it is telling us where the biggest severe issues are. Because sometimes what one resident might say is the biggest issue might not actually be the biggest issue, or maybe it is. But it's about looking at the data to tell us what are the issues, and also looking at like the systemic safety analysis. Maybe an area, the crash data doesn't show us that it's the biggest area right now, but it has the potential to be an area in the future. Then we would still want to tackle that area. But the biggest difference is just taking a laser focus and looking at the data and really prioritizing and putting our resources where it's telling us to go.
Thanks. Just a couple more questions to throw out. The next one's going to be for Albert again. So how will DPD ensure that enforcement of Vision Zero's initiatives is conducted in an equitable fashion?
Sure. So, we do that now. We make sure that we're going to our different patrol divisions and not just focused in one area. Now, the other part of it is to make sure that we are focused on the data that we use, like our traffic grants that come from the state, that is data driven. The other part is working on as I was telling Mr. West, based on the traffic complaints, the 311 complaints that show us that we're there based on a complaint. Crash data is another key component. And the other part that we're working on, a more internal part right now, is even I've made sure that our policies aren't requiring just a citation in every contact, right? Sometimes it's a verbal warning. I'm working on the written warning aspect of it. But the main thing again is that we're trying to change behaviors. So we put our officers in those positions or places that we need them to be. But when we are also focused on critical areas such as Vision Zero identified areas, then we take that enforcement a little bit tougher, right? But we make sure that we're not overburdening and being unfair with those that we stop.
Thank you. Just one more quick follow-up to that. Could you speak to the need to create a culture of safety on roadways in Dallas and what role DPD could help play in the creation of that culture of safety?
Sure. I think our biggest part is part of it is doing education. A lot of it has to do with part of that driver's ed. So we already under Chief Garcia's violent crime plan, we're more involved in the schools. So we can always begin to introduce that into being more courteous, more defensive driving, right? Emphasizing the principles of defensive driving to the point of MAD, to make sure we talk about being intoxicated, making sure that they're not doing that because it is illegal either way. But, you know, changing that behavior. The biggest part of our culture, as we all see right now, is we have persons who tend to be the most important person on the roadway. They've got to get to point A from point B. So we're trying to change that to where they are issued citations. Other parts is going through the legislature, making some of these laws a little bit tougher for those who are driving on the more extreme. And then the final piece to that, Wayne, is actually making sure that we're demonstrating in our own driving, in our own police cars, our own city drivers are signaling their intent to turn, they're being patient, that we're making sure that we are model drivers ourselves so that we can try to, again, be role models and those who can demonstrate that what is important, not only in safety, but also that we're all on that road together.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Albert. Just one more question to throw out for our panelists, and this one is going to be for Emma. And so this is another kind of education outreach based question, but so with your experience that you've had so far, I know you've mentioned that building partnerships is really important to your work with MAD. So could you talk about why it'll be really important for the city to take a partnership-based approach to Vision Zero outreach rather than just kind of going it alone?
Absolutely. I am very grateful for my community partners, and I feel like that we all bring such an important piece to this task force because like MAD, we focus on impaired driving, whereas traffic safety is so broad. And so one community partner might be a subject expert in one area where I would be in another. And so by bringing all of us together in this task force, it's just so important. And that's how we're going to be able to extend our reach within the community to, to educate and, be able to meet our objectives and those goals. So it's so very important. And I am very grateful to be part of this task force. And I want to commend the Catherine and all of your team, because y'all have done a wonderful job putting all of this together. And so I'm looking forward to see all this play out. And I think it's just so important for to have those partnerships.
Thank you so much. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, obviously kind of a partnership-based approach is going to be better. Nobody wants to go it alone. But I'll turn it over to Catherine and Hortensia. I think that's all of the panelist questions that I had today. So yeah, thank you so much to everybody.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. We do have another question. So someone is asking, speed humps and cushions are an excellent tool to calm speeding in neighborhoods. I did not see them listed as a low cost or high cost improvement example. Can you tell us roughly what they cost? Oh, Catherine.
Oops, okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so speed humps were not listed under, we had our, low cost, here we had, 4 streets that we did safety evaluations on, implementing low cost, high impact improvements, and then we gave examples. However, a lot of streets, or most streets on the High-Injury Network are arterials, are collectors where speed humps are not as appropriate because those streets see things like buses, see things like ambulances, trucks, and so we really try to keep speed humps to our local streets. However, we do recognize that they are proven to be one of the most cost-effective tools for reducing speeds, particularly on local streets. So with that in mind, our recommendation here, number 6, is to make a point of implementing speed humps and cushions or raised crosswalks on our local streets, and also just making sure that we're distributing them equitably across the city. So yes,
and if I can elaborate on that one,
yeah,
it is very important that to note that the neighborhood traffic calming measures include several options and not exclusively speed humps or speed cushions. So it depends, it's site specific. Some of them will work and some of them will be adequate for this type of treatment. Others may need a different treatment, especially in situations where we've got, in most places where we have to get Dallas Fire Rescue involved in the decision making on these things.
All right, well, I think that's everything in the chat. Does anyone else have any additional questions? At this moment, anyone that's on a call can unmute themselves by dialing *6 if you would like to speak. Or if anybody else would like to speak, please raise your hand and I can unmute you at this time. Okay. Let me see here just a second. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, this is Nolan unmuting.
Mm-hmm.
Just another question about back to the neighborhood traffic management program. Hello? Everything going quiet on? Or
yeah, we got
it. Quiet.
We can hear you, yes.
It's buffering, I don't know. So the oh God, I just
oh, we can hear you.
I lost my train of thought because I was trying to type at the same time as talk. I keep getting back to the jurisdictional question of East Grand Avenue is a state highway, and I know that they won't allow speed bumps, or the city won't allow speed bumps over 35 miles an hour. So how do you deal with that problem? And thank you, Chief, for telling me about motorcycle advantages. Thank you. But yeah, it's just, I guess one final question. The most annoying thing to me is not exactly traffic speed, but it's traffic noise. And there are no, in my day, I couldn't pass inspection if my exhaust was too loud. But today, that has all changed. And that, in my opinion, inspires people to punch the accelerator. So what do you do about that? Nothing. But, or you know, that's just the way it is, I guess. But we're just encouraging it. I don't know. Goodbye. Thank you. No, thank you all for your, you know, I lost my train of thought, and I'll shut up now.
Oh, thank you for those comments, Mr. West, and we do appreciate your feedback, and we understand the frustration, and unfortunately we're addressing the traffic safety as a broad scope. So yes, I agree. If you have those concerns, definitely anytime you do have a
traffic safety and traffic noise are related.
And another thing I wanted to
in front of our house is the perfect quarter mile. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Martinez, please note that I have not seen any police activity at the intersection of Blair and East Grand for over a year or two. And the last person that instituted that was Chief Castro at the instruction of David Blewett, who I voted against. So, see you later.
All right, sir.
Okay, thank you. And I want to point out to everyone that it's very important when you do have a request or any type of concern in your neighborhoods to please to use the 311 system. That keeps a record of any issues that are occurring in the city, and that helps the departments keep track of what is being addressed and what has not been addressed. So the 311 system is the way to go with submitting any type of concerns or requests to the city. Is there anybody else that would like to speak or submit a question to the chat at this time? Last call. All right. Anyone on the panel have any last comments that they would like to share before we close?
Again, Hortensia, I just would like to thank everyone for their participation, and certainly members of the panel. Greatly appreciated, but more importantly, the public at large for their input and their participation. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to implement, like the federal highways guidelines say, is implementing a safe system approach that requires the evaluation of the current state, evolving it for consistency and integration with what others are doing, and then making the paradigm shift to institutionalize this shift and change the culture from a culture that is where fatalities are acceptable to a culture that no fatality is acceptable. So we are trying to push in that direction. It is while it is a challenging task, however, it's not impossible. We're going to push forward, and we're going to be achieving this through a collaborative effort and with all who are involved in this process. Again, thank you so much for your participation and for this effort.
Thank you, Gus. Thank you. And we had one last question, and I want to address before we close. Someone asked if the participants on this meeting will be added to the mailing list for Vision Zero. There is a link on the Vision Zero website where you can sign up to receive notices and updates on the program. So I encourage you to visit that and just sign up with your information so that we can keep you updated on any new information that we have. Thank you all once again for being here tonight. Thank you to all of our panelists and our staff and everyone that was part of this, and have a good evening. Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, y'all.